So 3,000 Years of Longing is the new film by George Miller, a fantasy romance that kind of takes the story of genies and three wishes and tells this like surprisingly adult tale. Um, Now, of course, like for anyone who might have seen like trailers of this film, you might be assuming that this is kind of like a little bit more on the erotic side, and it kind of is. Like it's definitely a mature fantasy romance that's going on here. Um, but it has a little bit more to it that I didn't quite expect for a film like this. Like it's very daring, it's surprising, and it goes into some areas that I did not expect it to explore. And it has this very freewheeling nature where it feels like this is like a fantasy story that's perfectly attuned for adults. Like it always feels like like fantasy tends to be like focused on like the much like younger crowd with like young adults and stuff like that. And here's one for people who feel very much like they're in like that golden age and they want something a little bit more adult and touches into like more of their own desires that come with kind of like growing older and becoming a little bit more weary. So the story is that Tilda Swinton plays Binny, who is a literary scholar. She spends all her time obsessing over stories. She loves them. She loves the power of them. And she's especially fascinated by myths. She likes the idea of how, like, as we learn more, like, myths are kind of like, like kind of like guidance towards the unknown, the closer like you get to understanding more about life. But it's kind of like locked herself into like this rigid view. Now, like my fears kind of like set in once like you see Tilda Swinton as like kind of like this bookworm, and you immediately assume, oh, okay, so she's going to encounter a genie, and the genie's just kind of gonna like give her a makeover or whatever. And thankfully, that is not the case. She discovers the genie, the Djinn rather, while she's in Turkey. She finds this magical lamp, brushes it with an electric toothbrush of all things to clean it, and then out comes the genie, played by the Djinn, played by Idris Elba. And surprisingly, the Djinn is actually a very fascinating character. Like as the Djinn reveals, like he's not just like like just this being who wants his freedom or is completely like subservient to whatever his master wills of him. Like we actually get to learn a lot about him, and it's mostly just because of the curiosity that comes with Tilda Swinton's character. Because like here's where this type of story is perfectly mature. It's like here's Tilda Swinton's character who has spent all her time obsessing over stories. So she's very much familiar with the Djinn and the whole idea of three wishes and like the cautionary tale elements that usually come with this type of story. So it's very smart on that angle because like she's immediately like, oh, okay, yeah, you're a Djinn. I've read these stories. I kind of know what the deal is here. And the Djinn is kind of like, okay, yeah, you get the gist of it. But there's a little bit more of a personal side. Because for roughly a little over half the film is just exploring the backstory of the Djinn, with a little bit of like peppering of Binny as well. But for the most part, we're learning about the Djinn's history, how he was tempted by love, how the wishes never quite finished, how like people who got everything they wanted ultimately had no use for him and kind of cast him aside. As well as showing like all these little moments of like hope for him that are kind of like dashed, and sometimes these come directly from masters, like when like the last master that he had before Binny is revealed to be this woman who's learned like the secrets of the universe and is frustrated that she can't express them all and kind of like grows tired of like the Djinn trying to comfort her amid all this. And then sometimes it's more like indirect, like there's times where like the Djinn is just trapped in this bottle for centuries and decades and just wants someone to pick him up and almost does and never quite has that happen to him. And it forms the great basis for this romance between the Djinn and Binny, where we learn more about Binny, that she's been divorced. She's experienced loss. She prefers to get lost in stories, and she doesn't want to be hurt again. So obviously she's very cautious about trying to trust this Djinn with with granting her wishes. And also because like she's she's very skeptical of like the wishes that she would want, because the whole deal is like the Djinn will only grant you wishes that come directly from your heart about what you desire most out of your life. And it's an aspect that Binny hasn't quite thought about, and it coincides with the Djinn. Basically, they're both weary souls who connect on like a greater level of like trying to find more meaning in their lives. And I especially like how even for like how like you're going to hear this complaint from a lot of people. Like this film is very uneven to how it's kind of like set up, like because we get a lot of backstory for most of the film, and we spend very little time outside of that with the relationship between Binny and Djinn finally having combined. Which, yes, in case you're curious, yes, there's a pretty erotic scene between Tilda Swinton and Idris Elba. The trailers have not lied to you on that level. But I kind of like what they explore. Like Binny tries to find a greater understanding of the world, and the Djinn as well. Like I like this aspect where the Djinn is very much like a fish out of water, where like he's been locked for he's been locked for like a very long time in this bottle, and tries to understand how far humanity has come since then. And it's not like a standard fish out of water type deal. Like you think it might be at one point, just because one of the first things he interacts with is a television, and you're like, oh, magic box or whatever. It's like, okay, is this the type of film? But no, actually, like he learns pretty quick. It's like, oh, these are, I'm seeing like electromagnetic waves here, which is something that I'm very familiar with. And throughout the rest of the film, he finds himself more fascinated with humanity and how like creation shifts when he's not present, and and how fascinating it is when he is present in it. Like he gets to witness brain surgeries, and like he obsesses with like a satellite dish at one point, and all these surprising little moments that I didn't expect to see in this film, that has lots of special effects and historical drama and war epics and so much going on, and yet it always has this prime focus of these two souls and how they like form this romance. I guess like the biggest comparison I can think to it this year is there was a film that came out earlier this year called Good Luck to You, Leo Grande, which is about an older woman and a younger man who basically an older woman and a younger prostitute who connect and spend most of the time in their hotel room, just coming to terms with like themselves and their sexuality. And it's very much in that vein. It explores like it's not like exactly like Good Luck to You, Leo Grande, where it's just like a little bit of like of an erotic drama with like some more magic thrown into it. It feels like it's very much, it has like this greater focus on like a little bit more of like omnipresence, as well as like heart's desire and stuff like that. It's a very surprisingly nuanced romance that wraps it all in this fun little fantasy cocoon that explores all these areas that I didn't expect it to go into. Like it touches on a lot of desires and like issues of like coming to terms with yourself, and feeling betrayed and having your heart broken so many times. And I know, like, just because the way it's diced up with all like the backstories and all that, and we get a lot of narration from Idris Elba, and if you're expecting a lot of Djinn sex in here, you're probably not going to get as much as you think. But on this level of having this mature romance that blossoms between these two souls, especially because Idris Elba and Tilda Swinton are just like exceptionally perfect in these roles, especially for roles where they're expected to like switch up with like languages and react to like different special effects marvels. Like when Idris Elba first shows up, he's like as large as the room, so Tilda Swinton's kind of got to try to like maintain composure, but also speak Greek and try to like explain the rest of the world at the same time, which is a pretty impressive feat here. It's a very, very surprising film that I mean, like, I guess I should kind of expect like George Miller to be a little bit versatile. I mean, the guy who can go from making a Mad Max film to making Babe and among other films, and to turn out something just as fascinating as this, where even with with myself comparing it to Good Luck to You, Leo Grande, I don't even think that's like a great comparison too, because there's so many other aspects that are covered of this film that it's just it's just a mesmerizing film, and there are so many wonderful little like small moments that I love getting lost within here. Like there are moments where he's telling this like the story of how he lost his love to someone who could play music beautifully with like as kind of like a one-man band in this kind of like versatile setup, which is pretty clever but also very like very it was great to get just like lost within that music. And there's also little special effect sequences here, like when the Djinn kind of like shows off a little bit of his ability to manipulate electromagnetic waves. There are moments where like when one of his masters asks for the secrets of the universe, and we kind of get to see her understand everything on like a molecular level. Just all these wonderful little moments that I think just culminate beautifully and combine to just make this fantastic fantasy romance that I can't find like the best comparison for it. And I think that's kind of what I love about the film. Like it really is not an easy comparison to anything, and it's just it was so refreshing to see a film like this, you know.